Hello. Good evening. Thank you for coming. I'm Minna Proctor, and I run a literary magazine. And in that capacity, I read a lot of short stories. Many of them are terrible. Many of them are just fine, which could be a worse judgment than terrible. Some of them are very good, even thrilling. None of them are ever like the short stories of tonight's guest, Deborah Eisenberg, which I'll say more about in a moment. Bear with me first. The reason I bring up my job is that, as the editor of a literary magazine, I am frequently asked the question, what are you looking for in a short story? I have a couple of authoritative, intelligent-sounding ways that I respond to that question, a pile of phrases that in some non-patronizing way answers the question, what are you looking for? Well, how many ways can you answer in a non-patronizing way that question? Well, I just know it when I see it. Really, I'm looking for good stories, thrillingly good stories, which is a total platitude. And worse, there's a follow-up question, an obvious follow-up question, which may have been the question all along, the harder question, what makes a story good? Again, I always want to answer, I know it when I see it, but that's very unhelpful. Plus, it's a cop-out. Plus, since I review books a lot and also teach writing, I should probably have answers to even the most metaphysical literary questions. As a reviewer, I vastly prefer to write about books I admire, and my strategy is always to attempt to figure out and explain how the author I'm reviewing did whatever amazing thing I admire. And I can usually accomplish this much without getting metaphysical. The work is mechanically brilliant, it's audacious somehow, it's emotionally resonant, all very explainable. Which brings me, as promised, to Deborah Eisenberg, whose new short story collection, My Duck is Your Duck, I reviewed for Book Forum's fall issue. How to explain what I admired in particular about My Duck is Your Duck? How to comprehend and then put into coherent words how she achieved what she did. At a certain point, working on my review, I was ready to give up, lest I fail this luminous monument. I might as well have been standing on a street corner waving, "My duck is your duck," over my head, screaming, "This is a really good book, you should read it." That not being a plausible solution, I turned instead for help to the Italian writer Italo Calvino, whose 6 Memos for the Next Millennium has a great many metaphysical things to say about literature. Each one of those things, however, requires an hour-long lecture or several pages of prelude to outline. And each of the 5 topics he explores, lightness, quickness, exactitude, visibility, multiplicity, apply to Deborah Eisenberg's work, which is remarkable, but also perfect and possibly miraculous, because Calvino was talking about lots of different books. Only in an Eisenbergian long short story could multiplicity and exactitude, the signatures of detail and density, form alongside quickness and lightness. And here I am getting heavy again when quickness and praise are what is called for tonight. Several thousand incomprehensible words later, and the deadline for my review come and gone, I was deep in the metaphysical mud, ready to go back to screaming on a street corner. And I should say that these dramatics over my review of My Duck is Your Duck is not a negative commentary on Eisenberg's book, quite the opposite. My Duck is Your Duck is a magnificent achievement, a work of art that is mechanically brilliant, audacious, emotionally resonant, and it embodies lightness, quickness, exactitude, visibility, and multiplicity. And it reinforces the answer that I do sometimes manage to sputter out when pressed to the question of what makes a story good. It's not that it has all or even some of the components I just mentioned. For me, what makes a story good is that it feels as if it had to exist, as if it always existed, as if it were born, not made, and eternal. You see my problem. I was trying to explain the meaning of existence in terms of Deborah Eisenberg in 1,600 words and on a deadline. But tonight, thank goodness, you don't have to worry. My task is not to explain the life, the universe, and everything to you. Because tonight, Deborah Eisenberg is here instead, and will be reading to us from her stunning new collection of stories, My Duck is Your Duck, which may or may not reveal the secrets of the universe, depending on how closely you listen. Please join me in welcoming Deborah Eisenberg.
Thank you, thank you. I can't see you, but I think you're there. Well, that was really beautiful. Thank you, Minna. And thanks, everybody. I'm very glad to be here, and particularly with the company I'm keeping. If you were attending closely to Minna, you would maybe have heard between the lines that these stories are extremely long and very dense. And frankly, just between us, it's really impossible to find anything to read. But I have decided to read a chunk from the title story, Your Duck is My Duck, and so that at least it'll throw some light on the title. Unfortunately, as it's from the middle, I'll have to give you a little context. So the narrator of this story is a painter. She's not very successful, and she's suffering through the long New York winter, and she doesn't like her day job. And she encounters a fabulously wealthy and very stylish couple named Ray and Krista, who are very interested in her painting. And they say, hey, come spend a couple of months at our beach place, and you can lie around and you can work, and artists love to come visit us because it's very tranquil and pleasant, and they can get a lot of work done. So she takes them up on this invitation, and she flies zillions of miles to wherever this place is. And Krista picks her up at the airport and brings her to the kind of compound that they own, and brings her to the little house on the property that she will be staying, sharing with one of the other guests, a puppeteer named Amos Voinovich. And the painter is a big fan of Amos. She's seen one of his shows, she loved it, but she's never met him. Also staying at this place are a bunch of accountants because Ray is involved in some new big business deal, huge deal. So she's been instructed to come over to the main house at dinner time, and that's now. Dinner meant helping yourself from a selection of possibilities and then sitting down at a long polished table that probably seated 30. Amos the puppeteer did not, in fact, show, but the accountants were there. They didn't wear jackets, but they all wore exhaustingly playful ties, which suggested, I suppose, that Ray's forthcoming acquisition was so sound that chest-thumping frivolity was in order. Ray had reappeared and said hello to me, but barely, giving me a bitter little smile, as though he and I were petty thugs who had just been flagged down by a state trooper. And that was the last notice of me he took that evening. I watched through the glass wall as evening slowly began to rise in the bowl of the valley below, and soft lights glimmered on. The soft mauve twilight currents were rising around the table, and somewhere in that gently swirling dusk, the accountants were talking among themselves, telling jokes, it seemed. Their bursts of raucous laughter sounded like reams of paper being shredded, and after each burst, they would instantly sober up and swivel deferentially around to Ray. "What language are they speaking?" I whispered to Krista. "You really better drink some water," she said. It was English, I realized, but specialized. One of them was finishing up a joke that seemed to concern a pilgrim, a turkey, a squaw, and something called credit swap rates. They all laughed raucously again. Ray was drumming his fingers on the table, making a sound of distant thunder. The accountants swiveled around to him again with sweet boys' faces, and he stood up abruptly. "Gentlemen," he said with a tiny bow, "I have a great deal to gain from this transaction, assuming it all proceeds as anticipated. But if, at 0 hour, by some mishap, it should fall through, let me remind you that, owing to the billable hours clause you were so kind as to append to our contract, only you will be the losers. I salute your efforts. I have the highest hope, for your sake as well as mine, that your irrepressible confidence in them is justified. But perhaps a moment of sobriety is in order at this point, a moment of reflection about the tenuous nature of careers. Or, to put it another way, don't think for a moment that if the boat is scuttled, I'll throw you my rope. I'm sure you all recall the Zen riddle about the great Zen master, his disciple, and the duck trapped in the bottle. He drained his large glass of wine, glug, glug, glug. Everyone recall the master's lesson? It's not my duck, it's not my bottle, it's not my problem. He slammed his empty glass down on the table and wheeled out. "What did I tell you?" Krista said. What did she tell me? I had no idea. "Plus," she said, "I think he's seeing someone here." "Oh, wow," I said. And I thought of the bite that every morning would be taking out of her beauty and glamour. "Oh, wow," I said again. "You can say that again," she said. The accountants had disappeared from the table, I realized. All that was left in their place were crumbs. Back in my bedroom, I began to unpack, but there was the issue of putting things wherever, so I decided I would leave all that until morning. I fished my PJs out of my suitcase and opened the shuttered windows for the breeze. I was listening as though I were drunk, which I supposed I was from all the wine it had seemed appropriate to toss down at dinner, but mainly I was exhausted, though still wide awake, as I was so often, wide awake and thinking about things I couldn't do anything about. Also, an unfamiliar, somewhat rhythmic tapping suggested that there might be a beast, some brash snake, for example, in the vines just outside my window, trying to get me to open the screen and let it in. To account for my snoozing in the car from the airport, I had mentioned to Krista my exasperating resistance to sleep, and just before we sat down at the table, she gave me a few pills wrapped in a Kleenex. "What are they?" I asked. "They're Ray's," she said. "He won't notice." A few months back, I'd gone to a doctor about sleeping problems, and he'd asked me if I wanted pills. "I'm afraid they'll blunt my affect," I said. He looked a little disgusted, as if to remind me that he had a downtown practice, and I was not the first self-obsessed hysteric he dealt with that day. "Then your best bet is to figure out why you're not sleeping," he said. "What's to figure out?" I said. "I'm hurtling through time, strapped to an explosive device, my life. Plus, it's beginning to look like a photo finish. Me first or the world? It's not so hard to figure out why I'm not sleeping. What I can't figure out is why everybody else is sleeping." Everybody else is sleeping because everybody else is taking pills, he said. So I got a prescription from him, and I took the pills for about 5 nights running and flushed the rest down the toilet. They got me straight to sleep all right before I'd even had a chance to boot up the worries, and I would sleep for hours and hours, but then I would wake up completely exhausted, having spent my night fighting my way through dark tunnels that stank of a charnel house. And in the morning, when I got to work painting, I seemed to be sloppier or less demanding than I'd formerly been. Maybe my painting wasn't any worse than it had been, but I sure didn't mind enough that it wasn't better. I had to face it. My affect was blunted pills or no pills, unless weariness counted as affect. So I decided that I'd make myself stop painting for a while, or maybe forever, that I'd stop unless something forced itself upon me that I'd dishonor if I didn't paint better than I was able to. And the trip seemed like an ideal opportunity to clear my mind of whatever impediments to that. And even if I was left with nothing in place of the impediments, at least the sun would be shining. I heaved my suitcase onto a luggage rack and listed on my feet again. I needed to hydrate, probably, I thought. So I went downstairs and opened the door to the kitchen to search for water. A bony little person wearing a red and black checked shirt and skinny red and black plaid pants was sitting at the table regarding me with huge black eyes that looked as though they were rimmed with coal. He had a lovely, large, downward curving nose and a face so waxen and intense in its penumbra of black curls that it left an afterimage. "Am I disturbing you?" he said. "Not yet," I said. "I mean, we've hardly met." "The noise," he said. Spread out in front of him on the table were scraps of fabric and colored paper and little figures made out of clay and wood and a pot of glue and some little tools, including a little hammer. Oh. "Hey, I loved Terra Nova Dreaming," I said. "I really did." "Good," he said, "because I could use your opinion on this new one. I want to try running it here, but it's gotten pretty out of control. There are a lot of characters, including some bats that have to turn into drone aircraft and back again, which is a pretty tricky maneuver. There are a couple of kids from the village who could help me backstage, but I'd appreciate a good supplementary eye out front. I don't want to take too much of your time, though. Krista told me you were coming, and I figured you wanted to get your own stuff done, or why else would you be here?" "Well," I said, "I mean, to relax?" "Yeah, you must have a really unusual relaxation technique going." "Well, why do you—" "Hey, even some of the world's champ relaxers didn't show this season," he said. "Haven't you noticed? The whole crowd has bailed. All the other freeloaders and the usual apparatchiks. I'm here because I got evicted from my apartment when the arts program at the school where I was teaching got cut. And what with putting the new show together and not exactly having an income, luxury handouts were definitely attractive, whatever the hidden costs. I figured you were coming for some similar reason. Anyhow, the onus is on us, obviously. The onus? The onus to entertain, to distract, to diffuse, to buffer, on us, as in on you and me, which is why I hardly ever put in an appearance at the main house. And as I established the policy, immediately it's been interpreted as a sign of genius. Anyhow, I suggest that you adopt my example, ASAP, in fact, as things are clearly just about to get worse. I'm kind of way behind you, I said. He looked at me with a blend of interest and distant pity, like an entomologist considering something in a jar. 2 things, he said. And he started in, quietly but implacably, like a fortune teller laying out the pitiless cards. Well, that can't be true, I said, after he trailed off, gazing sadly out the window behind me. Is that all true? Have a look, he said. See for yourself. So I went to the window, and sure enough, off in the distance were bobbing lanterns, and I could see, as my eyes adjusted, the small line of people straggling down a dirt road toward the water, hauling little carts piled with bundles of stuff. They wait all night for the boats, Amos said, sometimes longer. Even a few weeks ago, you didn't see this too often, but now there are some almost every night. Apparently, most of the people in the area had lived for centuries by working little farms. But a few years earlier, there had been, there had been relentless rain, and the flooding had washed out the crops. And then there was a second year of that. The third year was a drought, and so was the next one. So none of the new planting could establish roots, and it all blew away. People were exhausting their stores of food, but then Ray bought up lots of the farms, which, under the circumstances, he got at a very good price. And instead of planting grain or vegetables, he planted eucalyptus, which roots really fast and as a cash crop and to keep the bluffs from collapsing. So everyone was happy for a while. But in the summer, there had been a few lightning storms, and the high oil content of the eucalyptus was graphically demonstrated when they burst into flame, burning down homes, as well as whatever crops were still being grown by anyone who hadn't sold their land to Ray, and food prices were skyrocketing. So, naturally, local people who could leave were leaving, and a lot of the foreigners, like Ray and Krista, who had places in the area, were pulling up stakes too. So, that's thing one, Amos said. Thing one? I said. And thing two is that Zafran has rented a place about 5 miles further up the coast. Zafran? You mean Zafran the model Zafran? Yup. But why should that be? Oh. Yeah, it started back in the city, it seems. Or that's what Krista seems to think. Zafran's Roshi is near here, and she comes every few months to study with him. She met him when she was here about a year ago doing that preposterous spread for Vogue, all those idylls of her and the donkeys and the beaming peasants with the Photoshop dental work. That's how the whole donkey ride business started, in fact, with the cute bells and fringe and so on. It was the stylist's idea. And anyhow, that's when she took up Zen. There weren't really any tourists here before the Vogue thing, but now there are plenty. So everyone in the village adores Zafran because the tourist income is about all anybody here has to live on. And a couple of months ago, Ray ran into her at some party at home, and she said she needed his advice about buying a place up here. And, well, so that's the story. Oh, God. Yeah, he said, anyhow, the cook is great, Marya, and she's a real sweetheart. She'll give you food to bring over here and heat up if you don't want to eat at the house. Oh, God, poor Krista, I just can't do that to her. Suit yourself, Amos said, but remember, she'd do it to you. His point reverberated through my head like a slammed door. I should go upstairs, I thought, and leave him alone to work, but it was hard to move, so just to stall, I asked him what his new show was about. Same old, he said, never loses its sparkle, unfortunately. And as Amos began to present the familiar elements and entwine them in a simple moral fable, I began once again to feel that I was falling into a dream. There was the castle, the greedy king, the trophy queen. There were the ravenous alligators watchfully circling the moat, soldiers in armor poised at the parapet walls with vats of boiling oil at the ready, and behind them, inside the towers, the king's general programmed drone aircraft whose shadows blighted the countryside. Who was the enemy? Serfs, of course, potentially, who mined underground caves with the help of pit donkeys and brought back huge sacks of gold and jewels to swell the royal coffers. Because what if the serfs and donkeys became inflamed with rage? They were many. But what the king and queen don't understand, Amos said, is that the serfs and donkeys are already inflamed with rage, and the bats who fly between the castle turrets and the mines are couriers. They're on the side of the serfs because they love freedom and flying at night, and justice, which is blind too, and the donkeys, once roused, turn out to be indefatigable strategists. Huh, I said, interesting. Yeah, I'm glad. It sure didn't require much thought, but it's got possibilities, I guess. What are you going to call it? I said. What will I call it? What will I call it? His attention seemed to be mainly on one of the little figures onto which he was gluing something that looked, I noticed, like an orange prison jumpsuit. I think I'll call it The Hand That Feeds You. I'm not sure that's such a... Yes, it is, he said. It's a great title. Hey, relax. I'll find something more appropriate to call it for this audience. So, how does it end? I asked. I'm not exactly sure yet, but this is what I'm trying out. There's a huge popular uprising, and for about 3 minutes, there will be a rhapsodic ode during which the serfs, the donkeys, the bats, and the audience rejoice. The end, everyone thinks. But no, because there's a second act, and it turns out that the greedy king and queen are only a puppet government, keeping a client state in order for an unseen, unnamed greater power. You mean like God? I mean like corporate executives. And now that the king and queen have been toppled, a state of emergency has been declared, and the laws of the land, such as they were, have been indefinitely suspended. And the corporate executives empower the army to raise the countryside and imprison the bats and the king and the queen, everyone, in fact, except the strongest serfs and donkeys, who will continue to toil in the mines, but under worse conditions than before. Wow, I said. I mean, that's pretty depressing. Well, yeah, sure, but I mean, these are the facts. You know, I'm so tired. I said, who knows what time it is at home? I think I better go upstairs. Do you have any idea where they keep the water? Here you go, he said, opening a cupboard that held cases and cases of fancy bottled water. So, good luck with that relaxing thing.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here tonight for Gary in this place, this coveted little square of stage. In fact, at this and lesser lecterns, I've introed and Q&A'd, or Q'd anyway, Gary, a bunch of times. So my challenge now is to say something different. So here goes. Gary Shteyngart is a finely tuned writer of polite Anglo-Saxon verse. Oh, I may have the wrong guy, actually. Of course, everyone knows Gary is not that, but is instead so powerfully himself. Let me say something true. Gary Shteyngart may not look the part, but he is a giant. I can't think of more than one or two other major contemporary novelists who've ridden a comparable train of critical success. No derailments to go along with the shiny and brilliantly upholstered coaches that are The Russian Debutante's Handbook and Super Sad True Love Story and Absurdistan and Little Failure. A Little Failure, the only unapt title in this whole procession. Actually, I'd thought that slim, truthful Confession may be his best book. I'd thought that until his newest one, The Great Lake Success. It's hard for me to admit because Gary and I are friends, and what's more harrowing for a writer than to compliment his writer friend. But like Wordsworth's son, I'm pretty breathless with admiration here. Not that this should matter to anybody. I mean, one of the many unfortunate consequences of living in the age of solipsism is so many jackasses frame some other great artist's achievement as having led to them. For example, I recently heard a soon-to-be-published first novelist talk about Tolstoy's having, quote, influenced her, as if that were the token of Tolstoy's importance. Narcissism. So please just let me declare, Gary Shteyngart certainly has built grander mansions than this, but he's probably the writer of my generation whose work has meant the most to me. Before I praise Lake's success, I need to give his other books their due: the precocious brilliance of Russian Debutantes, the crisp hilarity of Absurdistan, the Jules Verne clairvoyance of Super Sad True Love Story, the ragged laugh of Little Failure. But Lake's success is Gary Shteyngart's State of the Union address, and the state of our union is, The novel follows Barry Cohen, a hedge fund manager, on the front edge of a nervous breakdown. It also dives us into the brine of disgruntlements and confusions that brought about the results of the 2016 election. Who won that one again? I haven't been paying much attention, but in other words, this book is important. One hears that scream word all the time, important. But to speak like a Barry Cohen, important book is the devalued cash in the blurber's economy. Everything I Learned in Kindergarten Is All I Need is an important book, I just saw someone say. Or 50 Shades Darker is an important book. So says the handcuff and lubricant lobbies anyway. What does important mean, though? It means very little usually. In calmer times, less barbed times, I might have even contended that any book is important if it's good. But maybe this is a different time, and maybe that's a question for someone not so traumatized by bad judges and orange leaders. The thing people always talk about with Gary is that he's funny. He is funny. But even before this book, he was never just funny, never just emigre mishaps, emigre pratfalls, even though sometimes people wrote about him as if he were nothing more than Yakov Smirnoff with a printer. So here's a big statement. Gary Shteyngart's work may not read as ostentatiously profound, but it is profound, even beyond the profundity of his talent. I don't mean that you can tunnel through his work, bless you. I don't mean that you can tunnel through his work mining for what Saul Bellow called helpful to the sick cliches. There's no cheap uplift in a Shteyngarт book, no easy thumbs up, especially here where we follow a man who leaves his son precisely because his son needs him. But that's the bravery of Shteyngart's writing. Gary's books say no in thunder to just about everything. No in thunder. That's what Melville defined great literature as doing, stern literature, that it should say no in thunder to all the comfortable affirmations, all the bullshit yeses. Gary's work does this, says this with the requisite harsh weather. And yes, somehow what you notice first and last is the laughter of it, the harsh, unforgiving laughter of solemnity. The laughter that is his and Gogol's and almost nobody else's. It's Gary Shteyngart.
Hi there. Hope you don't mind. I'm a big sitter. I don't stand well. I tip over. It's a medical condition. Thank you so much, Darin. That was such a lovely introduction, possibly the loveliest introduction of my life. His memoir, all his work, but his memoir, Half a Life, is so influential when I was writing my own memoir. It's just an honor to have that kind of intro. And it's so great to be back here with Deborah Eisenberg, who also teaches with me at the Columbia Institute for Extraordinary Writers, a school on the other side of the park. And it's great to be here just because, it's the 92nd Street Y. I'm here with Lake Success, which is, I don't know, it's got a good cover, I'll say that. Many focus groups at Random Penguin worked on this cover, and they did a great job because you could see this cover from across Heathrow or Dubai International, any large airport. It's on fire, this thing. It's really quite bright. The text, I don't know, but the book is very bright cover. The hero of Lake Success, as Darin started to mention, is Barry Cohen, and he's a hedge fund manager. To be precise, he's running a hedge fund into the ground while being investigated by the SEC. And as the novel starts, Barry decides to run away from his failing marriage, his failing fund, and his autistic son on a Greyhound bus to pursue his college girlfriend in El Paso, Texas. Now, yeah, that's funny, right? Now, what could drive anyone, away from their family when they need him so much? Yes, Barry in what in Yiddish is called a schmuck. He's also a small-time ganef, or crook. And as he depletes his funds on his journey across the country, he also becomes a schnorrer, or beggar. So never say you don't learn anything at a Gary Shteyngart reading, right? I just taught you all the Yiddish you'll ever really need to know, especially if you're interested in finance. People have asked me, why did you write a book about a hedge fund guy? Why not your usual Russian losers? Why not write about yourself some more? Well, in the past decade, I became aware that a large number of my friends, the friends I'd come of age with in Manhattan, were gone, displaced by rising costs to Berlin or Abu Dhabi or the Eagle Rock section of LA or the mid-Hudson Valley, that whole Rhinebeck-Hudson belt. My friends, many of whom were fellow alumni of Stuyvesant High School and Oberlin College, worked as writers and graphic designers and academics and journalists, the heart of what used to be called the creative middle class, but they were all gone. So as I walked down the now unfamiliar streets of my city, eyeing a new breed of closely shaved, athletic individual, I kept wondering, who the hell are these people? Upon closer inspection, I discovered they mostly worked for banks or hedge funds or private equity firms. I had met only a handful of bankers in my life, but around 2012, I decided that my next novel would be about finance, since there was no one left to write about. And I realized pretty early on in my research that people in finance often had a different view of reality than most of the people I'd previously known. An older currency trader at a massive bank, I'm not even going to mention UBS by name. It wasn't UBS, it was Credit Suisse. Complained to me of the struggles of the middle class. And I said, yeah, I hear you. How do you define the middle class? And he said, I am the middle class. And I said, so what does that mean? And he said, just people struggling, just earning between $2 and $4 million a year. So when it was time to cobble together a character like Barry Cohen, who makes a lot more than $4 million a year, I kept thinking back to all those wonderful, deluded people I'd met along the way. So I'm going to read you just a bit of a chapter from Lake Success to introduce you to Barry Cohen. This scene is set in Atlanta. It takes place about midway through the book when Barry gets off the bus in the middle of his journey to visit his protege, Jeff Park, whom he actually fired from his hedge fund at one point. I actually took 4 months on the hound, or the dog as we call it, so you're welcome. And at this point, he's almost run out of money because he's left with New York, but nothing but a rollerboard full of watches, which he collects. And he had to get rid of his credit cards for complicated reasons. So he's in Atlanta to beg Jeff Park for a little bit of a bridge loan to fund his Greyhound journey across the country. That's him being a schnorrer, by the way. Jeff Park's living room was as palatial as the entrance to a modest New York museum. Enormous golden lights hung from the ceiling, which was at least 20 feet in height. Jeff had a full head of hair, gums that didn't recede, and he did push-ups in the middle of the day. He had gone to Cornell, but had not played lacrosse, like most of the guys in Barry's hedge fund. "So what's up, Barry?" Jeff said. "Just passing through Atlanta? Decided to look me up?" They were sitting in Jeff's kitchen. He had brought out a bottle of Yamazaki 20-year whiskey and was serving it straight up, quite decadent for 1:27 p.m. What the hell did Jeff Park do for a living? He had cashed out of Barry's hedge fund with zero. "All of this is going to sound crazy," Barry said. "Uh-huh. I'm on a journey by bus." Barry knew that he would eventually have to explain his flight from New York to people in his tax bracket. He knew that news of his meltdown would immediately form the latest bulletin in the incestuous, bloodthirsty world from which he had sprung. But he doubted it would really surprise anyone. The people in his world could be nuts. One fund was essentially a cult with its own Bible, ritual mind control, and feats of strength. One fellow at another fund, a quant billionaire in training, played piano at a third-rate bar while passing around a tip jar. Like your first ankle monitor bracelet or your fourth divorce, the occasional break with reality was an important part of any hedge fund titan's biography. "The things I've seen," Barry said, and he told Jeff a few of his Greyhound adventures so far. Jeff Park seemed interested. He poured more drinks, although he insisted Barry chase his with water. "Sounds to me a little bit like you're doing a middle-aged version of On the Road," Jeff said. "Like that one-eyed Mexican dude in New Jersey you said fell asleep on your shoulder? That sounds pretty Kerouac." "That's exactly right," Barry shouted. Oh, no wonder he had picked Jeff Park to host them. The man had literary sensibilities beyond most of his colleagues. They really did a good job of educating up at Cornell. "I used to take the Greyhound to visit my uncle's family in Savannah," Jeff said. "Everyone there looked at us like we were freaks." "Everyone looks at me like I'm a freak." "You kind of are a freak, Barry." Barry took that as the highest of compliments. He was bonding with this former employee whom he had fired. They were going to be friends now. "So are you from around here originally?" he asked. "Yeah, I moved back to Atlanta to take care of my parents." "And your parents are, I want to say, from China?" "Close enough," Jeff Park said. "My wife is Indian," Barry said. "Rock," Jeff said. "You ought to get married," Barry said, completely forgetting that his own marriage was but a team of 7 lawyers short of kaput. His instinct to help Jeff Park was overwhelming. He remembered his wife's friend, the Asian woman from Brooklyn, Tina or Lena or something. "Hey, I threw away my cell phone," Barry said. "Can I check something on your computer?" A laptop was provided. It had been a week since he had touched a keyboard. He brought up his wife's profile. "Damn, what a gorgeous family you have," Jeff Park said. "When I worked for you, I think you were just about to get married. Look at that kid of yours, those eyes." "Yeah," Barry said, his hand frozen over the keyboard. "Yeah, they're nice. Here's what I really wanted to show you." He scrolled through the list of Seema's friends until he found the right one. "Now, this girl is spunky," Barry said. "She called me a tool to my face. And I think she's pretty intellectual like you. Oh, one night in Brooklyn, she made these great Chinese dumplings for us. I bet your folks would love her." "Minna Kim," Jeff Park read off the screen. "Ah, not really up my alley." Barry was heartbroken. "But she's Chinese," he said. Jeff Park stared at him. "Yeah, I'm more into the Southern Belle type," he finally said. "Oh," Barry sighed. "But thanks for looking out for me. You're like that woman from Fiddler on the Roof." Barry sort of knew what he was talking about. Matchmaker. Jeff Park had a wide cultural reach. Well, he said, I'm going to make it my mission to get you married, he said. Nice guy like you. I'm not averse to the ladies, Jeff Park said. I've designed this place with them in mind. Huh, how so? Jeff Park took him on a tour, starting with a massive glass-top dining table. You see these lights, he said, pointing out a trio of Sputnik-style globes hanging over the mirrored surface. The average girl I date is 5'6", or an inch taller than the national average. I have a spreadsheet that lists the attribute of each girl I've ever dated. It's super granular. So if I'm making her dinner, and she's standing here, waiting for me, talking to me, maybe having a drink, the light from these lamps is directly level with her eyes. She can see better, and I can enjoy her glow. Barry was impressed by Jeff Park's thoughtfulness. A spreadsheet. The rap on guys in finance was all wrong. They cared too much. He knew he did. If you looked at it a certain way, he had abandoned his family because he didn't have the emotional bandwidth to accommodate their special needs. He examined an enormous couch. This sofa is the perfect height for a 5'6" woman, Jeff said. When she sits down, the sofa waterfalls at the back of her knees. He invited Barry to sit down. See, there's a gap of at least 3 inches between the back of your knee and the couch because you're tall. But if you were a 5'6" woman, you'd be completely snug. So you only date women of that height? Barry asked. Well, there's some variance, Jeff Park said. Maybe half a sigma. I don't want the tail wagging the dog, but yeah, mostly. You're a romantic, Barry said. Jeff Park shrugged and blushed. He was not unhandsome. His face was chiseled and tanned to perfection. The black athletic gear he was wearing made him look like a glossy seal in human form. Only the Rolex Sky Dweller on his wrist did not appeal to Barry's taste. Upstairs, Jeff had an airy office with full view of Atlanta's Midtown. Barry felt a twinge of passion at the sight of a fully operating Bloomberg terminal. Jeff Park only had one screen going, which was cute. On a glass board, he had sketched out some trades that looked exceptionally long-term and cautious, making some kind of play around Alcoa and Dow. Just scanning the numbers on the board, Barry assumed an AUM, assets under management, of $35 million, which in the best of worlds brought in, what, a couple $1 million a year? And he could live on that and be happy and buy couches that waterfalled the legs of median women. I trade maybe 2 hours in the morning, Jeff Park said, and then I spend the rest of the day working on myself. I read at least 100 books a year, and if I'm at, let's say, 70 by November, I'll take the rest of the year off to catch up. I like reading books to the girls I date. Beckett plays, Chekhov stories, Shakespeare sonnets. Believe me, they need culture around these parts. Wonderful, just wonderful, Barry said. This is what I'm talking about, real self-improvement, a vocation and an avocation. So many guys say, I want to die at my peak net worth, Jeff Park said, but not me. Clearly not, Barry said. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that functioned as TVs in the rain shower tub. Yeah, that's my favorite sentence of the whole book, by the way. I find that incredibly funny. I'm so glad people laughed. I'm going to read it again. Yeah, let's do this. Jeff now led him into a bathroom. They were looking at the double mirrors that functioned as TVs in the rain shower tub. That's why I come to the Y. Affirmation. On the TVs, Ted Cruz was saying he would not be voting for Hillary, but he wasn't going to endorse Trump either. Yeah, I used to stay at the Trump Hotel in Columbus Circle whenever I visited New York, Jeff Park said. Never again. I'm a moderate Republican, Barry said. Socially liberal. I'm on a Greyhound, for Christ's sake, right? They went downstairs for a new course of drinks. Jeff Park was making them with ruby red vodka and Seagram soda now. They sat at a table made from the cross-section of a giant tree. Its height was also designed to seduce an average woman. Barry felt around the serrated bark of the edges. He liked his furniture slightly rustic, with hints of the arts and crafts movement. That was supposed to be the motif of the Rhinebeck house if he ever finished it. "Who made this?" Barry asked. "Ah, it's a Japanese eucalypti," Jeff Park said. "I bought it in Kokura. It reminds me of how lucky I am." "Kokura," Barry said. "You never heard of the luck of Kokura?" Barry shook his head. "All right, I'll tell you. August 9th, right, 1945, an American bomber was headed to bomb Kokura on the island of Tinian. But there was too much cloud cover over the city that day, so the plane was diverted to Nagasaki." "Wow," Barry said. "Lucky for Kokura." "Yeah, right, luck. If I were born in, I don't know, Bangladesh to whatever, a family of rag pickers, would any of this happen?" He gestured at his 4,500 square feet of property. "You know about my mom? She worked as a maid in Buckhead when they got here. I remember the food stamps with the drawings of the old whiteys signing the Declaration of Independence. I memorized the words on it, U.S. Department of Agriculture food coupon. Where else could a maid's son end up like this? That's why I'll always take care of my parents. I'll always live in the same town as them. I've got to honor the luck that was given me." Barry thought of his own relationship with his parents. His mother had died in a car accident when he was 5, and he had bought out his father's swimming pool company for $4 million, about 10 times what it was worth, so that his dad could finally retire. But after that gesture, and after his father's openly racist behavior at his wedding, he mostly avoided the old man. He went out just once to La Jolla, California, where his father was living with his girlfriend Netta, whom he had found on an online Zionist forum. Netta was a former social worker and had 2 grown kids in LA. The moment she met him, she pressed Barry into her freckled décolletage and proceeded to give him a detailed tour of her beautiful garden, where she and Barry's father spent most of their time drinking coffee and looking at their laptops. Her house was a 1940s U-shaped ranch with back-to-back fireplaces, wild beehives in the pepper trees, little gardens of shiso leaves and miniature roses, 2 box turtles and a rabbit named Sylvester. There were plums that Netta's kids used to throw on the streets to watch them get run over, and blood orange shrubs in the front yard, and in the middle of what even the Holy Bible would have to acknowledge to be the true Garden of Eden, sat 2 elderly people in their Make America Great Again caps, silently scrolling through the latest outrage to their common gene pool in the dusty hills and valleys of another land. "I'm so sorry about your son getting autism," Netta had said. "Did you give him vaccines? I'm sure that's what did it." "I told him not to get the vaccines," his father hollered from his perch beneath a plum tree. "I sent him the link about how the Somalian Muslims were spreading it through their doctors in Minnesota." Barry was out of there in less than 36 hours. 8 months later, his father was dead of pancreatic cancer. Maybe Jeff Park was just a better son, and maybe better sons made for better people, and that's why their moms didn't die in car accidents, their faces caked in blood. But that's not luck, Barry said, returning to the theme of the conversation. Okay, sure, it's helpful not to be born to rag pickers in Bangladesh, but mostly your success was a result of your own hard work and your parents' gumption to move here. "You don't consider yourself lucky?" Jeff Park said. "Not for a minute," Barry said. "I never had any advantages. I wasn't even lucky enough to be born an immigrant." Jeff Park laughed. "That's funny," he said. So now we're going to skip ahead just a little bit toward the end of the chapter. A lot has happened. Barry and Jeff's bromance has truly grown. They've compared their watch collections, which is what people in finance do when they really like one another. They've been all over Hotlanta, and the previous night, the 2 of them went to Buckhead, a wealthy suburb, to watch the GOP convention in Cleveland. After their wild night out, Barry put his hand on Jeff Park's shoulder in a very ambiguous way on the ride home, and this leads to problems between them the next day. And one tiny thing about this part, Barry's being investigated by the SEC for trades on 2 companies, Value Pro and GastroLux. And they both hiked up prices for certain medications, and Jeff Park's father was on one of those medications. Okay. It was early morning. It was raining. The Atlanta skyline was covered in gloom. Barry carried his sorrow before him. Yeah, I think it's time for me to shove off, he said. Jeff Park was popping nuts into his mouth and sipping a macchiato. Okay, he said. Yeah, Barry said, yeah, I gotta head to Old El Paso, see an old friend of mine, ex-girlfriend, I should say, girl. Jeff Park smiled. Props to your wanderlust, he said. Barry hiked himself up on the counter. This is gonna sound embarrassing, he said. I'm gonna need a tiny bridge loan just to get me to El Paso. I don't have access to my funds at the moment. It's complicated. Maybe $2,000? I can't do that, Barry, Jeff said. That hurt Barry right away. Why not? You've accommodated me for this long. This is just a loan. You're welcome to my house, always, but I can't stake you. Who's talking stake? $2,000. That's 4% of the cost of your Rolex Skydweller. I feel like I'm getting mixed signals from you. Jeff Park looked down at his lap. You fired me, Barry, he said. Oh, that. It wasn't me, Barry said. It was Akash Singh. Everything at that fund happens because of Akash Singh. I'm just a figurehead. You were there. You invited me out to breakfast at Casa Lever, and when I got there, it was just you and the lawyer. What did the lawyer say? I'm afraid we're going to have to part ways now. Okay, but that's how it's done. That's the legal way. You didn't say one word to me, Jeff said. I wasn't allowed to say one word. And I thought of you as something like a mentor almost. Barry sighed. I'm in genuine pain, he said. So much of the time. Doesn't that deserve something? Attention must be paid, Jeff Park said. What? Death of a salesman? Not right now, Barry said. I wish you'd been straight with me, Jeff Park said. What do you mean? You don't have any credit cards. You don't have a cell phone. You travel on a bus where you pay for your tickets in cash. Was it that Gastrolux trade? I mean, have you been subpoenaed? Are they after you? Did you get your Wells notice yet? I didn't do anything wrong, Barry said. It's a witch hunt. The government is after anyone who makes money, anyone who has friends. My father used hydroanditone, Jeff said, the diuretic. Frankly, he can't live without it. I don't follow, Barry said. Value Pro? What? A month's supply went from $30 to $700 as soon as Value Pro, of which you own 20%, bought the company that made the drug. Jeff Park paused as if to let that figure register. But Barry had heard it all before. Prices went up. Shareholders profited. What part of capitalism didn't Jeff Park understand? And I've got money, Jeff said, so I got my dad covered. But that's how I think of people like you. I always have the same visualization. I start with a row of middle-class houses, like the one my dad lives in, and then I see you. You go from house to house, from family to family, and you take money from their wallets, from their purses, from under their sofa cushions, and you put it in your pockets. And when your pockets are full, you put it in a duffel bag with the logo of your fund. You don't sneak in, you don't break in, you just walk amongst these people as if they're invisible, and you take the money they've earned, and then you go home and you buy yourself a watch or whatever. You own a Patek 1018 in rose gold, Barry said. That's worth over $1 million. I'm not blameless, Jeff said. But I have my limits. And I know who I am. See, Barry said, that's what I'm trying to find out on this journey, who I am. Sure, Jeff Park said. And then when it's over, you can tell people about it. I'm sorry? You can tell them the story of how you once took a bus across the country. You can tell them about your journey. Jeff Park's Bentley entered the exciting world of Atlanta's downtown. They passed the red-eye bail bonds and the Atlanta DUI Academy, which exists, actually. A group of men had gathered outside the bus station to stare each other down with maximum malice. Be careful, Jeff Park said. This bus station has a bit of a reputation. The men outside were whooping it up about the car. Bentley, they shouted. I hope you find your 5'6" woman, Barry said. Jeff Park stuck out his hand and Barry shook it. You're going to turn out better than me, Barry said. He grabbed his rollerboard and he got out of the car before Jeff Park could say goodbye.
First question. Gary, the first question's for you.
Okay.
How did the hedge fund guys feel about the book? Also, how did you find hedge fund guys to do the research for the book?
Okay. So a lot of hedge funders actually read my novel Super Sad True Love Story and completely misinterpreted it. They thought it was a critique of the Obama administration instead of being a book about a crypto-fascist, social media-driven regime, such as the ones we find ourselves in now. I even found out there was a group of tax exiles in the Virgin Islands who read it in their book group. So it was very easy to become friends with them. And in fact, I realized they kind of needed someone to talk to because they all hated one another, and their families hated many of them as well. So I became kind of the hedge fund whisperer. So I would spend, because they would compete against each other on their Bloombergs all day long, and then they'd meet up for an aggressive poker game to end the night. So I was the person who could listen to, how their mothers never loved them and how they grew up lower middle class, boohoo, and stuff like that. I mean, I did too. So we kind of bonded over that. Would they recognize themselves in any of the book? I don't know if you find this. People never think that they're the character. Absurdistan was a book I wrote a while ago, and it concerned a 425-pound son of Russian oligarchs. And my friend was the 425-pound son of Russian oligarchs. And when Absurdistan came out, he was lumbering down the street toward me, and he said, who's that schmuck Misha Weinberg? So people never know, which is good. Right?
He knows now.
Oh, he knows now, yeah. Sorry, Misha.
But how did you meet the first hedge fund guy?
The first hedge fund, Patient Zero, was a friend of mine is a journalist at Bloomberg, was at Bloomberg, now she's at Barron's, and we went to a party, and she said, Gary is interested in writing a book about hedge funders. And I met him, and I quickly met his wife, who was great too. And she said, I remember, she gave me some of the best dialogue for the book in a way. We had a little kid, he's now 5, but he was 4 at the time, and we were applying to all these fancy Manhattan schools, and she said, oh, you have to send your kid to ethical culture. And I said, why? And she said, because of the diversity. And I said, really? She said, yeah, some of the kids at that school, their dads aren't even hedge fund guys. They're just doctors or lawyers. And then how do you not write a book,
Debbie, a somewhat related question. What does research look like for you when compiling, when working on a story as long as you do?
Well, it doesn't look like anything because I don't do any. I'm sorry. I wish I could answer that. I don't. I think maybe for one story once, I actually did a little bit of research, but basically, by the time I'm writing, the research has been done just by walking down the street.
Good answer.
Oh, I want to add something to what Gary was asked, actually. I mean, what Gary said about it, that people really don't recognize themselves. I don't write about actual people, but I know people who do, and nobody recognizes themselves, but people often think that a character is them. I mean, is the person. I mean, And it's totally unrelated to the person who thinks it's them.
Yeah. Well, with the hedge fund guys, there's something funny also in that they want to be recognized as basically criminals. Their show Billions on Showtime, you'd watch it with people who work in that field, and they're like, oh, that's me, that's got to be me. And this person's about to get arrested, for securities fraud and sent for 5 years in prison. He's like, that's got to be me. I'm always committing securities fraud. Yeah.
And is there a knock on the door?
Yeah, and I'm like, I'm going. I'm going to.
The audience was shy tonight, so this is what I've got to work with. I think we might just cut it short and go to the signing, and anyone who wants to ask a more personal, erudite question should feel free to do so directly. Thank you both for coming.